Hello guys, my name is Balkrishna Srivastava and welcome to CodeWithBK. In this video, I will discuss about the nextInt method which is in the Java's scanner class. So before we begin, it is a request that if you find this video helpful, please do subscribe to my channel because your support is very important for me to grow on YouTube. Alright, let's begin. So nextInt is a method in the scanner class, okay, which when called on a scanner object extracts and returns an int, okay, from a scanner source, okay. So scanner object is basically, okay, reading from a source, okay, and from that nextInt extracts and returns an integer, okay. So before I explain how nextInt exactly works on a scanner object, I will talk a little more about source. So source here is basically a kind of input, a way you can provide input to a Java program. So I'll take three examples of a source from which scanner can read. So the first one is user input, okay, which is basically your standard input, okay. This stdin, this standard input is basically that console or terminal from where you type input, okay. That input goes through this scanner object and then it is read into the program, okay. So you can use a scanner object to read from standard input, okay. Second is basically file input, okay. You can use a scanner object to use file as a source, that is the contents of the file can be read as input through a scanner object into a Java program, okay. And the final is string, okay. So I'll discuss about these two first and then I'll tell you about this. So if you want to use a scanner object to read from standard input as a source, we create a scanner object like this. We do scanner, sc1 is the name of the object using the new keyword scanner, okay. And we pass system.in, okay, inside the constructor of scanner, okay. This indicates that my source for this scanner object is standard input. Next is file input. In this case, my source is a file. So I'll take sc2 as the variable name. And since my source is a file, I will pass a file object as an argument to this scanner constructor, okay. Okay. So this is how you create a file object. You create a new file object and you pass in the file name. This can be any file name. I have taken the file name as int.txt. Alright. Now, if you observe these two are different sources from which a scanner object can read, but the sources are both strings eventually, because in standard input, when you type input, that goes as a string to this scanner object. And when this scanner reads a file, okay, the contents of the file is also a string which goes into this scanner as source, okay. So we are passing strings to both these scanners through different sources. So we can directly pass string to the scanner as well. So if I name this object as sc3, rather than giving them a source that reads a string, okay, that gets a string, I can directly pass a string, okay. So I'll say 40 space 60, 50 space 60. So this is a space, okay, this is to denote a space, okay. So coming back to why I focused on source, because nextInt is going to read from any possible source, okay, through a scanner object in the same exact manner, okay, only the source differs. Alright, so getting back at nextInt, so nextInt extracts and returns an int ignoring all white space characters, okay. This WS stands for white space. So white space can not just be a single space, it can be any possible white space, \t, \n, and so on, okay, any possible white space in Java, okay. So what this exactly means and how nextInt exactly works, I'm going to show you some examples and I'll show you how nextInt works. So if I have this as my terminal/console, so basically this is my standard input, okay, case 1 sc1, and this is my prompt, okay. And if I give an input of say enter, this denotes an enter. I'm pressing an enter key, space 43 space enter key, okay, enter key space 56, okay. Suppose this is the input that I gave in my terminal/console, which is standard input, okay. So as I told you, this input that you give is basically given to scanner as a string. So if I convert this to a string, okay, so this denotes that I'm pressing enter, which is basically a \n character in Java. Again I press enter \n, again I press enter \n, then 3 spaces, 1, 2, 3. I'm using this to denote spaces. I have 43 space enter, which is \n again, space \n again, space 56. Okay. So when you give this input in standard input, this basically goes as a string to this scanner object, and then we use methods like nextInt, nextDouble, nextFloat, next, and so on to extract from this string. Okay. So on this input, which goes as a string, I call nextInt, okay, on this sc1 object. I do sc1 dot nextInt, or you can say sc1 dot nextInt. Okay. So nextInt basically reads an integer from this input following these rules. Okay. Ignore all white space characters till you find an integer. Backslash n is a white space character. Ignored, ignored, ignored. Single white space is a white space character. Ignored, ignored, ignored. We found an N43 which we return. Okay. So the first call of nextInt returns 43, and this part is still left as input in my scanner object. Okay. So let's consider a second source, which is a file. So if I have a file, say in.txt, okay, and my file contents are exactly the same. That is, if I have change in line, change in line, change in line, space, 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 43, space, change in line, space, change in line, space, space, 56. Okay. Okay. So when I create a scanner object that reads from this file, okay, all this content, okay, goes as a string in this object, which is exactly the same. Okay, because this input and this input is the same, and since the string given to scanner is same in both the cases, so sc2.nextInt, okay, in this case, okay, is also going to return 43, and in this case also this green part is the input which is left in sc2. Okay. So a third scanner source sc3 is basically reading from a string. Okay. So I will pass a string as an argument to this constructor of scanner. Okay. And I'll pass this exact string. Okay. So I'll say backslash n, backslash n, backslash n, space, 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 43, space, backslash n, space, backslash n, space, space, 56. Okay. All right. So now this scanner is scanning from this string input. So when I call sc3.nextInt, okay, that give me an integer from this input, okay, from this string, I get 43 again, okay, because nextInt is going to behave the same way for the same input string, okay, even if the sources are different. Okay. So the idea of telling you about different sources is that scanner works in the same way, okay, even though the sources are different. Okay. And when you think of the input provided to this terminal, standard input, as a string, it gets easier. Okay. It becomes something very similar to this. Okay. So this green part is basically the input left, okay, in all the scanner objects. So if I call sc1.nextInt again, okay, it follows the same rules. Ignore white spaces till it finds an integer. So ignored, 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 and it returns 56. Okay, and this input is used. Okay. Similarly, the next call here will also return 56. The next call here will also return 56 because they have the exact same string as source to these three scanner objects. Okay. What if I call nextInt again? There is no more input left. Okay, this was the exact input I gave. Here also there is no more input left, and here also there is no more input left. So when you are trying to call nextInt and there is no more input left, you get no such element exception. Okay, because you are trying to get an integer from an input, okay, which is exhausted. You don't have any more input. Okay, so I'm going to take a few more cases, okay, in this terminal, this standard input, to show how nextInt behaves for different cases. Okay. Okay, suppose I provide input as 43 space, 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 hello. Okay, all right. And let's check what nextInt returns on this input. Okay, first call of nextInt, I'm supposed to return an integer and ignore all white spaces before that. So 43 is an integer. Okay, I find it and I return. Okay, the input which is left, okay, is this part. Okay, next call to nextInt, I ignore all white spaces till I find an integer. So ignored, 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 ignored. I found a string and not an integer because this will be returned as a string. So in the next call of nextInt, you found a string, you were expecting an int, so you get input mismatch exception. Okay. In our next input case, I take 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4. Okay. So my first call of nextInt is going to return 1. Okay. And the input that is left is this part. Okay. In the next call of nextInt, this will be ignored, this white space will be ignored, okay, and I will be returned 2. So I get 2 as my second call to nextInt, okay, and this part is left as input. Okay. In my third call of nextInt, this white space is ignored and I get 3 as the return value. Okay. In next call of nextInt, okay, this white space is ignored and I get 4. Okay. All right. So I've used all my input, and if I call nextInt again, okay, and since there is no input, I will get a no such element exception. Okay. In my final case, I take say 43, hello, sorry, space, 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 56. Okay. When you call nextInt on this input, the first token red is a string. This is treated as string because there is no space between 3 and h. Okay, if it was 43 space hello, this would be returned as an int. But since there is no space, we found a string, not an int, we get input mismatch exception. Okay, so this is how nextInt works, and I showed you a few examples here in the terminal. It would work the same way if it was in file or it was given as a string here. So the final points that you need to remember is this definition, that ignore all white spaces and returns the first integer that is found. And if you do not find an integer, you found a string, you return input mismatch exception. If the input is empty, you have used all the input, and then you call nextInt, you get no such element exception. Okay, there is one more exception, is if you do sc1.close. That is to say, if you close a scanner object and you call nextInt on this, okay, you will get illegal state exception because the scanner is closed and you cannot read anymore from this scanner. So I hope this video was helpful. And before moving on to the system and running all this, it is a request that if you like this video, if you found this helpful, please subscribe to my channel, and let's move on to running this on the system now.
So this is the code we just discussed, and these are the three scanner objects. SC1 is reading from standard input, SC2 is reading from file which is int.txt, int.txt, okay. These are the contents of int.txt, and then we have a string, okay. This string is also very similar to my int.txt. White space is 43, white space is 43, and white space is 56. I'm going to call nextInt on all these three scanner objects and their return values printed. So you're getting a prompt because this is called first. And since this is reading from standard input, you have to type something. So I'll type exactly the contents of the file. I'll paste. Okay. So you can see the nextInt values for all the three scanner objects is 43. Okay. Just as we discussed. Okay. Because this scanner is reading nextInt from here. Okay. Which is 43. This scanner is reading from this file, which is this 43. And this scanner is reading from this string, which is 43. Okay. So I will call nextInt again. Okay. So you see, we'll get the second value 56 for all the three cases. And again, I'm going to paste the same input. Okay. All right. So you see, second nextInt call is 56. All right. Now I am going to take only one scanner object which is reading from the file. Okay. And test the border cases. I'll say sc1, I'll comment this. Okay. All right. Two calls. So right now there are two inputs only. Okay. So I get two integers. Okay. So if I add one more call, I get no such element exception because I'm expecting three integers, but my file only has two. So the line that calls nextInt the third time, which is 23, line number 23 throws no such element exception. Okay. Testing another case, I'll say, okay, I'll give it 43 space hello. Okay. And I will remove this call. So the first call to nextInt is going to return me 43. The next call is expecting an int, but we get a string, so we get input mismatch exception for the second call on line 22 in this case. So let me run this. Okay, 43 for the first call. For the second call on line 22, we get input mismatch exception because we get a string instead of an int. Okay. Final case. Okay. Okay, this is a string. Okay, this is not an integer because there is no space. Okay, so in my very first call on line 21, I will get input mismatch exception like it. So I get input mismatch exception on line 21. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful. So please do like this video and subscribe to my channel, and please let me know in the comments if there was anything not clear to you in this video, if there's a question you want me to solve, or if there's a concept you want me to discuss. Thank you.